The call came just before dusk. An unmarked trail. Faint footprints. A worried mother. And one missing little girl. He'd answered dozens like it before. Cold cases. Long odds. But he went anyway, because that's what you do. He brought the K9, trained, seasoned, and silent. The trail was weak, fading fast under falling snow. Hours passed. Hope slipped. And then, the dog stopped. Stared into the woods. Disappeared. When he caught up moments later, he saw her. Not the girl. But the dog. Standing still. Holding something in her mouth. He knelt. And when he saw what it was, those tiny pink shoes, crusted in ice, his knees buckled. And for the first time in years, he cried. The dispatch came through at 3:47 p.m. A missing child, age 7. Last seen that morning near the edge of the woods behind an isolated family rental cabin upstate. Her name, Lily Carter. Brown hair. Blue jacket. Small, high-pitched voice, the kind you probably hear on a playground before you ever spotted her face. Jacob Hayes had been on duty for almost 12 hours by then. His thermos was nearly empty, and his legs ached from an earlier trail search 2 counties over. But the call wasn't optional. Not for someone like him. He pressed the radio to his mouth and replied, Unit 4 en route. The drive took just over 40 minutes. The roads were winding, half snowed over, the kind that wrapped around the shoulders of hills like loose thread. His partner, a golden retriever named River, lay still in the back seat, eyes wide and quiet. River didn't bark. She didn't whine. She just listened. Jacob had come to rely on that silence. It wasn't cold. It was tuned in, like she knew something the rest of them didn't. Maybe she did. When they arrived at the cabin, Lily's mother was standing on the porch, wrapped in a gray blanket, her face pale and eyes sunken. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, though it had only been a few hours since her daughter had vanished. She was playing outside, the woman said in a hoarse whisper. I went in for 5 minutes to make cocoa. When I came back. Her voice broke. Jacob nodded. He didn't press. Not yet. He glanced at River, who had already leapt out of the back of the truck and stood at the edge of the snow line, nose high. The girl's father paced in the driveway, muttering to himself, eyes darting toward the woods every few seconds like he might see her reappear out of thin air. Jacob stepped closer to the edge of the woods, pulled the girl's jacket, the extra one from the cabin, out of a sealed plastic bag, and let River sniff. Track, he said. River moved instantly. Not fast. Not excited. Just with purpose. They followed the trail downhill, moving between thickets and brush that had grown wild over the years. Occasionally, Jacob glanced back toward the cabin, the worried faces of the parents shrinking with every step. He didn't say what he was thinking, that the snow had covered any visible tracks. That the woods were too wide. That if she'd wandered far, they might not reach her in time. But River didn't pause. She moved with certainty, her nose low, tail flicking, winding through trees like she'd walked this route before. Jacob had been through this too many times to get hopeful too soon. Still, his pace quickened. About 40 minutes in, the terrain began to change. The trees grew tighter. The snow deeper. River stopped once, nose twitching, then veered left. Jacob followed. Then the wind picked up. Sharp. Sudden. He could barely hear himself breathe. But River pressed forward, weaving through a narrow rocky pass Jacob hadn't noticed on the map. He ducked under a low branch, caught his coat on a jagged limb, cursed softly, and then stopped cold. River was gone. River, he shouted. No answer. The woods swallowed his voice. He felt the edge of panic rise in his chest. She never strayed far. Not ever. He jogged forward, calling again, heart now pounding. And then, just beyond the rise, he saw her. Standing still. Mouth closed gently around something small. She wasn't wagging her tail. She wasn't barking. She was waiting. Jacob stepped closer and dropped to his knees. They were tiny. Pink. The left sole worn unevenly. A small patch on the toe torn loose. Crusted with frost. He took them from her mouth gently. Felt the cold bite into his palms. They were Lily's shoes. He didn't need to ask how River knew. She just did. And for the first time in years, after too many late recoveries, after telling too many parents, we did everything we could, Jacob felt his throat tighten. He knelt there in the snow, shoes in hand, and bowed his head. And cried. Jacob didn't stay on his knees long. Training kicked in, the part of him that was still a professional, still alert, still responsible for the outcome of this moment. He tucked the shoes into his pack gently, zipped it closed, and placed his gloved hand on River's head. "Good girl," he whispered. She didn't wag her tail. She just turned her nose back to the wind and started forward again. Jacob followed. The shoes meant one thing for sure, Lily had come this way. But there were questions that followed closely, like a second shadow. Why had she taken them off? Where was she now? And what else had she left behind? He reached for his radio. "Unit 4, he said. "Confirmed item, shoes. Located approximate half-mile southwest of original search radius. Continuing trail with K9. A crackled reply, "Copy that. Sending backup to coordinates." Jacob clipped the radio back and kept moving. The terrain began to slope. Not steep, just steady enough to worry him. Kids didn't usually walk downhill for fun, not for long. Especially not alone. Especially not in freezing temperatures. But River didn't falter. She turned again, nose low, navigating over buried rocks and fallen branches. And then she stopped. This time at a patch of disturbed snow. Barely visible. Like something had pressed down and shifted slightly. Jacob knelt and brushed at it with his glove. A sock. Tiny. Blue. Still damp. He didn't radio this one in. He just stood. And kept walking. River barked once. Not loud. Not panicked. Just enough to say, "Here." Jacob broke into a jog. He found her by a dead tree, split in half down the middle from a long-past lightning strike. Beneath it, a small trail of prints circled clumsily in the snow. In the center of the ring, a single mitten. Purple. He picked it up. Sniffed it. Still faintly smelled of cocoa. His breath hitched. "She's still moving," he muttered. Still trying. He didn't have kids. Never had. Never thought he would. But this trail, this pattern, he could feel it. Lily hadn't given up. She wasn't wandering. She was trying to get home. They continued deeper. Radio updates came less frequently now. The signal weakened with the distance, but Jacob sent pings when he could, dropped small reflective tags every 50 yards to mark the trail for backup. It was standard. But none of this felt standard anymore. It felt like something personal. The sun was slipping lower now. The woods turned blue, then gray. River's pace slowed, but her focus never shifted. Then she paused again. Nose to the wind. Sniffed. Turned hard to the left. "Okay," Jacob muttered. Okay. What she found wasn't clothing this time. It was a stuffed animal. A small white bunny, soaked on one side from lying in snow. Its ears were frayed. One of the button eyes was missing. Jacob reached down, picked it up and stared. It had a name stitched in the paw. Lily. He sank slowly to a crouch. "Why are you dropping things?" he whispered, as if Lily might somehow hear him through the trees. "Are you leaving clues, sweetheart?" River stood beside him, unmoving. She knew. This wasn't just tracking anymore. This was a message. He radioed in, "Unit 4. Found another personal item. Coordinates incoming. Visibility dropping fast." A crackle. "Copy that. ETA of secondary units, 45 minutes. Too long," he thought. Too far behind. Jacob rubbed River's fur with one hand and tucked the stuffed bunny into his coat. "Keep going," he said quietly. They crossed another bend. And then, a noise. Faint. Soft. Like breath. River froze. Jacob held up his hand instinctively. And listened. It came again. A whimper. "Hi." From somewhere up ahead, behind the tall cedar just beyond the incline. Jacob didn't speak. He just ran. He hit the incline hard, boots slipping in the snow, hands grabbing at roots. When he reached the top, he nearly stumbled forward. There, at the base of the tree, was Lily. She was curled tightly in a ball, jacket zipped to her chin, her bare feet tucked beneath her thighs, shaking. Eyes closed. But breathing. He fell to his knees. "Lily," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. He reached for his radio. "Unit 4. I found her. She's alive." Jacob didn't move right away. He knelt in the snow, staring at the little girl curled into herself at the base of the cedar tree. She was alive, but barely. Her small chest rose and fell in shallow waves. Frost clung to her eyelashes, and her lips were tinged blue. Her coat was zipped to her chin, but her hands were bare, fingers drawn into fists inside her sleeves. River stood a few feet back, tail low, watching silently. Jacob removed his gloves and reached out slowly, carefully. "Lily," he said, his voice low and warm. "My name's Jacob. I'm here to take you home." Her eyes fluttered again, trying to stay open. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. "You're okay now," he said. "You're safe." He moved swiftly, but gently. He wrapped her in his emergency thermal blanket, cradled her body against his chest, and pressed his own coat around her. She was light. Far too light. He tapped his radio, praying the signal would hold. "Unit 4 to base. I've located the child. Condition is critical but alive. Requesting immediate medevac coordinates." The reply crackled back with relief and urgency. "Chopper inbound. 10-minute ETA. Stand by for flare clearance." Jacob secured Lily tightly and stood, adjusting her weight so her head rested against his shoulder. Her skin was cold, but there was warmth underneath, barely, but it was there. She had made it this far. Alone. Or not alone. Because River had found her. River, now pacing ahead, turned to glance back at Jacob. Her look said it all. "Follow me." They moved quickly but carefully, retracing their path toward the only clearing large enough for a chopper to land. The wind had picked up again, but it didn't slow them. Jacob focused on his breathing, matching hers. He whispered to her as they moved. "You're doing good, Lily. Just a little longer." Her eyelids fluttered again. River barked once. Then again. They were close. The clearing was just beyond the narrow pass where they'd found the shoes. Jacob reached it and set Lily down on the driest patch of ground he could find. He knelt beside her, wrapping her tighter in the emergency blanket and placing his gloved hand over hers. River stood beside them both, ears perked, facing the sky. The radio buzzed. Unit 4, visual confirmation. Chopper inbound. 10 seconds. Jacob looked up. The thunder of rotors cut through the silence. The helicopter descended in a spray of snow and noise, settling like a bird landing too hard. 2 paramedics rushed forward. Jacob stepped back but didn't leave Lily's side as they assessed her vitals. "She's stable," one of them shouted through the wind. "Cold exposure. Minor frostbite. But she's holding on." They loaded her onto the stretcher and carried her toward the chopper. Just before they lifted her in, her hand shifted. And her fingers, weakly, reached for something. River stepped closer. And Lily's hand touched the fur of her snout. Jacob felt his throat close again. He watched the chopper rise into the fading daylight. Then he sat down, suddenly exhausted, in the middle of the clearing. River lay beside him. Silence settled again. He looked over at her. "You did it," he whispered. "You found her." River licked his gloved hand once. And lay her head down. Back at the cabin, when Jacob returned on foot almost an hour later, Lily's parents were still waiting on the porch. When they saw him, they ran forward. "She's alive," Jacob said before they could speak. "They've taken her to St. Anne's. You should go." The mother burst into tears. The father looked like someone had just given him permission to breathe for the first time. They both wrapped Jacob in a hug that lasted longer than he expected. Then they were gone, pulling away in a truck and speeding toward the hospital. Jacob sat on the cabin steps. River lay next to him, her muzzle resting on her front paws. Neither of them said anything. But everything had been said. That night, he returned to the station alone. River curled up in her blanket near the fire in the corner of the search and rescue lodge. Jacob sat at his desk, staring at the logbook. He wrote slowly. Child located. Initial contact at 17:58 hours. Frostbite present, early hypothermia onset. Recovery possible due to sustained warmth, terrain shelter, and full K9 tracking response. Then he added. River tracked the entire path alone. Led me directly to the child. Recovered personal items that led to continued hope. Response exceptional. He hesitated. Then added one last line. She found her when I wouldn't have. She saved her. He closed the log. Looked across the room. River was asleep. But he could still see her in the woods. Standing still. Waiting. Holding the shoes. And it struck him again. Not just what she'd done, but how much it had meant. The next morning brought a strange stillness. Jacob sat on the back steps of the station lodge, sipping black coffee from a chipped metal cup. The sun rose slow and heavy, casting gold through the trees. River lay a few feet away, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed. Her fur caught the light like a living monument. Neither of them had slept well. Even though Lily had been found, the weight of the night still pressed against Jacob's chest. That kind of search didn't just end when the child was safe. It stayed in your bones. His phone buzzed. Caller ID, St. Anne's Medical Center. He answered instantly. A nurse's voice greeted him. Kind, professional. She's stable. Parents are with her. She's asking for the dog. Jacob smiled faintly. River's here. We'll come by later. She asked for you, too. That part caught him off guard. Me? Yes, the nurse said. She remembers your voice. She asked if the man in the woods is okay. He stared into the woods. I'm working on it. He dressed quietly, slipped River's vest back on, and together they drove down the valley road toward St. Anne's. The hospital was a low gray building tucked into a curve of the hills. Nothing flashy. Just the kind of place you go when you need to feel like someone still cares. Inside, a nurse led them past quiet rooms until they reached a private pediatric wing. Room 208. Jacob hesitated. River nudged the back of his leg gently. He took a breath and opened the door. Lily was sitting up in bed, tiny arms tucked around a stuffed rabbit Jacob recognized instantly. The same one River had found. Its ears were still frayed. When Lily saw them, her face lit up. "River!" The dog padded forward slowly, tail low but wagging. Lily reached out, and River placed her head in the girl's lap with the delicacy of a dancer. Jacob stood back, unsure of his place in this moment. Lily looked up at him. "You found me," she said. Her voice was soft, but clear. Jacob knelt. "River found you. I just followed her." "But you stayed," Lily said. Her words hit harder than he expected. "I was really scared," she added. Jacob swallowed. "I know. You were very brave." Lily's mother sat quietly in the corner, tears rolling down her cheeks again. But this time, they were tears of gratitude. "She hasn't said this much since we got here," she whispered. "She's been so quiet." "Sometimes," Jacob said, eyes still on Lily, words wait for the right moment. River remained at Lily's side the entire visit. When it was time to go, Lily whispered into River's ear. No one heard what she said. But River lifted her head gently and licked Lily's cheek once. Jacob stood and left the room changed. Back at the station, he updated the log again. Added notes on Lily's condition. Noted her recognition. Described her emotional connection to River. Then he closed the book and sat there, silent. He'd worked search and rescue for over 12 years. Seen more than he wanted. People saved. People lost. Moments that haunted and moments that healed. But something about this one lingered. Maybe it was Lily's voice. Maybe it was how River carried those shoes with such care. Or maybe it was how, for once, someone asked if he was okay. Later that evening, Wes dropped by, another handler, younger, less worn down by years in the field. He sat across from Jacob with a beer and a raised brow. "You all right?" Jacob nodded. "Yeah. You cried, didn't you?" Jacob looked at him. Then looked away. "I didn't think I still could," he admitted. Wes was quiet a moment. Then said, "Maybe that's why it happened." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Maybe the dog didn't just save her," Wes said. "Maybe she saved you, too." Jacob didn't reply. He didn't need to. The next morning, River's K-9 performance review arrived by mail. He tore open the envelope and scanned the form. Exceptional performance under duress. Demonstrated advanced scent tracking, item recovery, patient stability, and emotional intelligence beyond expected standards. At the bottom, hand-signed. Recommend commendation. Jacob tacked it to the station corkboard. Then walked over and scratched behind River's ears. "Good girl," he whispered. She tilted her head. Then padded over to her bed, circled twice, and dropped down with a soft sigh. Jacob sat at his desk, logged onto the department server, and opened a blank report. Title: Operation Lily Recovery, Lessons Learned. He stared at the blinking cursor. And finally, typed. Sometimes, you don't realize what's missing in you, until someone smaller, colder, and braver helps you find it again. The days after Lily's rescue were quiet. Too quiet, if Jacob was honest with himself. Search and rescue work didn't stop just because one case ended. But something shifted inside him after that night in the woods, something that didn't quite go back to normal. He caught himself looking at River more often. Watching how she moved. How she listened. How she seemed to feel things before he did. It wasn't just about commands or discipline anymore. It was about trust. About connection. About something neither of them could say out loud. On the fourth day after the rescue, Jacob took River up to Elk Ridge, an overlooked trail they used more for conditioning than missions. It was steep, rocky, and nearly deserted this time of year. But the view at the top was worth the climb. River took the lead, weaving through switchbacks without hesitation. Jacob moved slower than usual, his thoughts heavier. As they reached the summit, he paused and looked out across the valley. Snow still clung to the trees in patches, but spring was whispering underneath, in the trickle of runoff, in the scent of damp pine. He sat down on a flat rock and River came to his side, settling in with her head on his knee. He didn't speak. But he didn't need to. After a while, he pulled something from his pack. Lily's shoes. He hadn't turned them in with the rest of the items. They'd been marked as found, but Jacob kept them anyway. The department hadn't asked, and he hadn't offered. He set them gently on the stone beside him. The fabric was still a little stiff from drying out, the pink faded, laces still knotted the way River had carried them. Jacob stared at them a long time. "You ever wonder why she dropped them?" he asked softly. River blinked, then looked out at the valley again. "I think she wanted someone to find her," he said. "I think that was her way of leaving a trail." He swallowed. "Maybe I was supposed to be part of it." They sat there for nearly an hour. Just a man, a dog, and two tiny shoes. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Of memory. Of weight. Of something sacred. That night, he placed the shoes in a box, not to bury them, but to keep them safe. He wrote Lily's name on the top in careful block letters. Then tucked it onto the shelf next to the other memory boxes, the few he kept from the most meaningful rescues. There weren't many. But this one belonged. Later that week, he received a letter. Handwritten. From Lily's parents. It was simple, honest, and filled with gratitude. But it was the last paragraph that stopped him. "We don't know how to thank you. Not just for finding her, but for giving us something we thought we'd lost forever, hope. Lily sleeps with that stuffed bunny every night. And she talks about you and the dog like you're part of a story. One with a happy ending." Jacob read it twice. Then folded it slowly. And placed it in the same box as the shoes. Wes stopped by again that weekend. Brought 2 coffees. No words at first. Just handed Jacob the cup and sat across from him on the porch bench. "You thinking about retiring?" Wes asked after a while. Jacob looked over. "Why?" "You've been different." Jacob considered that. "I'm tired," he admitted. "But not finished." Wes nodded. "That's fair." There was a long pause before Jacob added, "I just don't want this to become routine." "What?" "Feeling something. Remembering what it means." Wes gave him a look. "I think you just defined the opposite of routine." Jacob smiled slightly. Then turned to River, who was lying by the door, half asleep. "She knew before I did," he said. "What we were walking into. What it would mean." Wes followed his gaze. "She's special," he agreed. "But so are you." Jacob shook his head. "She's the one who carried those shoes." The next morning, they received another call. Not a child this time. An elderly man lost from a retirement community 20 miles north. Early signs of Alzheimer's. Took a walk and never came back. Jacob geared up. So did River. As they reached the truck, Jacob glanced back at the station's corkboard, the performance report still pinned at the top. He gave it a soft tap as he passed. Then looked down at River. "You ready?" River sat tall. Waiting. And then she moved. Some things, Jacob realized, you never stop doing. Not because you have to, but because you need to. The call came just after sunrise. An elderly man named Howard Grant, 82 years old, had wandered away from his assisted living center sometime in the early morning hours. He was last seen by staff around 4 a.m. during routine checks. By 6 a.m., his bed was cold and the front gate was open. Jacob stood in the center's small front office, scribbling notes in his logbook as the head nurse nervously recounted the details. "He likes to walk," she said. "Always has. But he's getting worse lately. Sometimes he forgets where he is." Jacob nodded. It wasn't unusual. But that didn't make it less dangerous. Temperatures had dipped into the 30s overnight. And Howard had left without a coat. Or his medication. River was already out front, sniffing the grounds. Jacob stepped outside, pulled the elderly man's wool scarf from the evidence bag, and offered it to her. She sniffed. Blinked once. Then walked toward the west gate. Jacob followed, boots crunching on gravel. The area behind the facility bordered woods, but not wilderness, more like tangled forest trails left to grow over the years. Old footpaths. Scattered wildlife. Easy to get lost in. Especially for someone tired and confused. About 20 minutes into the walk, River paused. Jacob knelt beside her. A crushed leaf, dark with dew, marked a partial print, not deep enough for certainty, but the shape was promising. A soft indentation from a slippered foot. He nodded. "Keep going." River pressed on. As they moved deeper into the trees, Jacob's mind wandered, not away from the search, but into it. He thought about how different each case felt. Each one had a rhythm, a pattern. Lily's had been frantic, like a skipped heartbeat. This one felt slow. Faded. Like Howard wasn't running away, just walking in circles, chasing a memory. Jacob wondered what he was chasing. A face? A time? A version of himself that hadn't needed reminders to stay safe? River barked once, a short sound, then silence. Jacob quickened his pace. She stood at a fork in the path, nose low. A wool glove lay there, half buried in leaves. Jacob picked it up. "Howard," he said softly, "where are you heading?" They continued on. Signs of a weak trail emerged, bent grass, disturbed soil. River stayed focused. Determined. But Jacob felt a difference in her posture. She wasn't just tracking anymore. She was reading. Reading the quiet between movements. Reading the hesitation in the man's steps. And something else. Compassion. They found him near an old stone wall, just before the edge of the creek bed. He was sitting upright, back against a tree, eyes open, hands folded neatly in his lap. Jacob stopped. River stood still beside him. Howard turned his head slowly. His expression wasn't one of fear. He looked like someone waking from a dream. "Didn't mean to cause a fuss," he said. Jacob smiled. "You didn't. We just missed you." Howard blinked. "That your dog?" "She's the one who found you." Howard looked down at River, who stood close now, silent and calm. "She reminds me of my old one. Penny." Jacob knelt beside him. "You okay to stand?" Howard nodded. "Just tired." With River leading the way, they walked slowly back up the trail. Howard took Jacob's arm. Leaned in gently. "I used to walk with my daughter," he said. "She'd come with me through the pines. Years ago." Jacob nodded. "Do you still see her?" Howard smiled faintly. "Not for a long time." When they emerged from the woods, staff from the center rushed forward. Howard smiled politely but looked weary, disoriented. Jacob stayed until he was settled safely inside. Back at the truck, he stood with River in the quiet morning air. "You knew how slow to go," he said, looking down at her. "You waited. Just like with Lily." River blinked once. No bark. Just presence. Back at the lodge, Jacob filed another report. Clear. Efficient. Factual. Subject located in stable condition. No injury observed. Rehydrated on scene. K9 tracking successful. But beneath the official lines, he scribbled something smaller, less formal. Sometimes people aren't trying to get lost. Sometimes they're looking for the past. And sometimes, the dog understands that better than we do. Later, as dusk rolled in, Jacob sat on the porch steps again, River beside him. The memory of Lily's pink shoes still sat fresh in his mind. But now there was another image layered on top. An old man beside a tree. A gentle dog at his feet. In the quiet comfort of being found, without shame, without noise. Just found. It was 2 weeks after the rescue when the envelope arrived. Plain, white. Hand-delivered by a courier, not through the usual station channels. No return address. Inside, a photo. Jacob recognized the face immediately, Lily, bundled up in a bright green sweater, sitting cross-legged on a hospital bed with her stuffed bunny in her lap. Her cheeks were fuller. Her color had returned. And there, lying beside her with a pink ribbon around its neck, was a new pair of shoes. Tiny, clean, and nearly identical to the ones River had found. On the back of the photo, in small, careful handwriting. She picked these out herself. Said they should be the same, so you'd recognize her. Jacob stared at the image for a long time. Then walked over to the corkboard above his desk and pinned it beside River's commendation. He stepped back, arms crossed. River looked up from her spot by the stove. He nodded once. "We're visiting her." The hospital had already released Lily a week earlier, but the family stayed in town longer than expected. Needed the time, her mother had said on the phone. She doesn't like sleeping without River. That stuck with Jacob more than he admitted. They drove out to the rental cabin, the same one Lily had disappeared from, now clean, quiet, and no longer edged with panic. A woman greeted them at the porch with a soft smile. "You're right on time." Inside, Lily was waiting with that same green sweater and new shoes already on. She stood in the middle of the living room like she hadn't moved in hours, her eyes fixed on the door. When it opened, she didn't look at Jacob. She looked straight at River. And ran. River didn't bark. She just stepped forward and let the girl crash into her, tiny arms wrapping around her neck like she was anchoring herself to something unshakable. Lily didn't cry. But Jacob almost did. He watched from a few steps back, hands tucked into his jacket. Lily's mom appeared beside him, her voice low. "She's different," she said. "Not scared anymore. Just quiet. But strong." Jacob nodded. "She's earned that. She asks about you. About what it's like where you work. About River's day." "She does? She wants to be a rescuer." Jacob smiled for the first time in days. She'd be a good one. They spent the afternoon on the porch. Jacob sat with Lily, answering her small, careful questions. "How did River know where I was?" "She followed your scent. You left little signs." "Like the shoes?" He nodded. Lily looked down at her new pair. "I made sure these don't fall off." "They're nice," Jacob said. She smiled. "Do you think River remembers me?" Jacob looked down. River had fallen asleep on Lily's feet. "I think she always will." Before they left, Lily handed Jacob something. A drawing. Crayon and pencil. It showed a little girl in a snowy forest, curled up beside a big golden dog. Behind them, a man stood, holding a pair of pink shoes. Everyone was smiling. Jacob folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat pocket. "I'm keeping this," he said. Lily nodded. "It's true." Back at the truck, River hopped in with ease, tail wagging just slightly. As Jacob turned the engine over, he looked down at the dash where the drawing peeked from his pocket. "She wants to be like you," he said softly. River blinked. Then laid her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak the rest of the drive. But Jacob didn't need to hear anything. The image of Lily's face, healed, strong, and glowing with something close to joy, played over and over in his mind. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel heavy after a visit. He felt whole. Back at the lodge, he pinned the drawing next to the photo. Then stepped back again. The wall was filling up. And this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a legacy. Spring rolled in quietly. The kind of slow shift only people who live close to the land really notice, the way the ground softens before the buds appear, the sound of water beneath melting snow, the way the sun lingers just a few minutes longer each day. Jacob found himself walking the trails more often. Not for duty. Just for presence. River stayed close, always a few steps ahead, occasionally glancing back to check if he was still following, not because she needed guidance, but because she was used to leading. They didn't speak much. But they didn't need to. The station had grown quieter too. Fewer calls now that winter had passed. No missing hikers. No elderly wanderers. Just quiet shifts, coffee gone cold, and logbooks filled more with maintenance notes than emergencies. Jacob didn't mind. It gave him space to think. And one morning, he realized something strange. He missed her. Not in a sad way. Just in that quiet ache of someone whose presence had carved a new place in his memory, like a melody that hummed even when the music stopped. Lily. It had been a few weeks since their last visit. He hadn't wanted to intrude. Her family deserved the time. But when a postcard arrived at the station's mailbox, his hesitation vanished. The card was bright yellow. The front had a cartoon dog holding a magnifying glass and wearing a rescue vest. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "Dear Jacob and River, I told my class about what happened. My teacher said I was very brave. I said River was braver. Mommy says I should say thank you more. So thank you for finding me and for not letting go. I drew another picture for your wall. Can I visit again soon? Love, Lily." Jacob didn't realize he'd been smiling until Wes walked in and said, "That a love letter?" Jacob held the card out without a word. Wes read it, then nodded. "She's gonna remember this her whole life. So will I." Jacob pinned the postcard on the wall. Below it, he placed Lily's second drawing. This one showed Jacob and River standing outside a cabin, hands joined with a tiny stick figure girl. Above them, in pink crayon letters, it read, "Thank you for finding me." Later that week, Lily did visit. Her parents had planned a short getaway back through the hills and asked if she could stop by the lodge to say hello properly. Jacob agreed. He didn't prepare much, a few coloring books, some trail snacks, and River's favorite toy. But Lily didn't come for games. She came with purpose. As soon as she arrived, she stepped through the doorway like she'd been there before. "This is where you work?" Jacob nodded. "Most days." She turned in a slow circle, taking in the equipment, the maps, the faded photos of old rescue teams on the walls. "It's quiet." He chuckled. "That's a good thing." Then she pointed to the corkboard. "Toes," she said. Jacob raised a brow. "The shoes," she added. He laughed. "Right." She walked over and stared at them. Then at her drawing. Then back at River, who had settled near the fireplace. Without a word, Lily walked over, curled up beside the dog, and rested her cheek on River's back. Jacob felt time slow. This girl, the one who had once nearly vanished, was now grounding the entire room. Not with noise, but with presence. After an hour, her mom returned to pick her up. Lily stood in the doorway, turned back once, and whispered something to River again. Same as she did at the hospital. Jacob didn't ask what. But this time, River barked once, softly. As if she understood every word. After they left, Jacob sat in his chair by the fire. River joined him moments later, resting her head on his foot. She's stronger than most grown men I know, he said. River didn't move. She's why you brought me the shoes, isn't she? Still nothing. But the silence felt like a yes. Jacob reached up and touched the postcard. Then leaned back and closed his eyes. And for the first time in years, he let the stillness in his chest feel full, not empty. The snow was long gone now. By late spring, the forest had turned lush, canopies full of green, creeks rushing from thawed mountain tops, and the trails bursting with signs of life. Everything seemed to be starting over. And Jacob? He was different too. Not in any way someone passing by would notice. He still wore the same fleece jacket, still kept the same old thermos of lukewarm coffee. Still gave River half of whatever sandwich he was eating. But inside, things had shifted. He felt lighter. Not because the work had changed, but because he had let it mean something again. He hadn't gone out to the trail near the old cedar in weeks. It wasn't necessary. There were no active cases. No missing persons. Just a patch of forest where one of the most important moments of his career had happened. But something told him he needed to go back. Not for duty. For memory. He parked near the old ranger gate and walked the first half-mile in silence. River trotted beside him, not rushing. Just moving with him. As they reached the slope where Lily's trail had turned downhill, Jacob paused. He looked at the spot where he had first seen the tiny shoes. The tree was still split down the middle, scarred from some forgotten lightning strike. The snow was gone, but the shape of that moment remained. Like the echo of something that changed everything. Jacob knelt beside the tree, brushing aside pine needles and soft moss. In his coat pocket, he pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, Lily's original shoes. Still intact, still gently folded together. He brought them today not to bury, not to display. Just to remember. He placed them softly on the ground and sat beside them, River laying at his side. He didn't say much. Just sat. Let the breeze move through the trees. Let the birds chatter overhead. Let the memory of that night replay, not as something heavy, but as something sacred. He remembered every detail. River's stillness. The bark that wasn't panicked, just focused. The moment Lily's eyes fluttered open, barely breathing, yet alive. And the shoes. Carried gently in River's mouth. A message before the rescue had even begun. I didn't know how much I needed this, he murmured aloud. River didn't react. She didn't need to. This wasn't for her. It was for both of them. After a long while, Jacob stood and placed the shoes back in the box. He turned to River. Let's leave something behind. She blinked once. He pulled a small wooden tag from his pack, hand-carved the night before. On one side, he'd burned in the date of the rescue. On the other, a tiny paw print and a small word. Found. He placed it on a hook he'd driven into the tree. It wasn't official. But it mattered. As they walked back up the trail, the light filtered differently. Or maybe Jacob just saw it better now. Back at the lodge, Wes was waiting by the porch with 2 coffees. He raised one. You went to the tree? Jacob nodded. Yeah. Felt different? Jacob took the coffee, sipped. Felt finished. But not forgotten. Wes smiled. That's rare. Jacob leaned on the porch railing. You ever think we don't always rescue people? Wes looked over. What do you mean? Sometimes, Jacob said, watching River stretch out beside the door, they rescue us. There was silence for a while. Then Wes asked, You keeping the shoes? Jacob nodded. Always. But you left a marker? Just a small one. Wes sipped his coffee. I think you're allowed that. Inside, the corkboard now held 4 things: River's commendation, the photo of Lily with her new shoes, her first drawing, and the yellow postcard. Jacob looked at it all and saw not documentation, but a story. A thread. A reason. That evening, as dusk settled, Jacob sat on the back porch with River. The wind was gentle. The woods alive but calm. And for the first time in a long time, he felt no weight in his chest. Only stillness. Only peace. Weeks passed. The green of spring turned deeper, richer, and the first hints of summer warmth settled over the valley. The calls came and went: a lost hiker, a sprained ankle during a trail run, a family dog that wandered too far from camp. All of them resolved quickly, efficiently. But even in routine, something had changed. Every time Jacob clipped River's vest on. Every time they stepped onto a trail. He remembered. Not the trauma. Not the fear. But the whisper of a girl nearly lost, found because of something unexplainable between human and dog, between instinct and hope. One afternoon, Wes came by with an envelope. No return address again. But Jacob knew before he opened it. Inside, a printed photograph. Lily. Not at the hospital. Not on a couch. But on a trail. Wearing hiking boots, a pink backpack, and that same green sweater. She was standing next to a field guide, pointing at a tree. Smiling wide. Behind her, a shadow, her mother, watching proudly. Written on the back, in neat cursive. She wanted to show you she's not afraid of the woods anymore. Jacob felt a lump rise in his throat. Not sadness. Not even joy. Just gratitude. That he got to witness someone come back to life. That evening, he pinned the photo next to her others. The corkboard was full now. More than a collection. It was a reminder. Of what mattered. Of what stayed with you. Of why, even on the hardest days, you didn't quit. Later that week, a training group from another county arrived for K-9 demonstrations. Young recruits, full of energy, eager to meet the dog that saved the girl. Jacob watched them pet River, ask questions, laugh as she responded to their commands with calm confidence. One of the younger handlers approached him. Is it true she carried her shoes all the way? Jacob smiled. It's true. Why do you think she did that? He paused, thoughtful. Because she knew we were meant to find her. The girl nodded, then added quietly, I hope I get a partner like her one day. Jacob looked at River. She was sitting in the shade, calm, alert. Already watching the woods. That night, Jacob wrote one last entry in his private notebook, not the official log, but the one he kept for himself. There are things we carry, bags, radios, gear. But the heaviest things, the ones we hold closest, are the things we can't explain. The shoes a dog brings you. The words a girl whispers. The feeling you thought you'd forgotten. Those things stay. He closed the notebook. Ran a hand through River's fur. Come on, he said. Let's take a walk. They didn't need a reason anymore. They walked because it mattered. Because in a world where so much disappears, some things deserve to be remembered. As they reached the rise above the lodge, the sunset broke across the trees like fire. River stopped, ears up, then turned to him with eyes that held no doubt, only readiness. "You knew before I did," Jacob said. River stepped forward. The same trail. But never the same steps. Jacob didn't cry. But the warmth behind his eyes? It wasn't grief anymore. It was what healing looked like. In silence. In memory. In a pair of shoes.